The deed felt heavier than it should have in Boone Whitmore's weathered hands as he stared at the farmhouse that was supposed to be empty. 3 women stood on the porch like sentinels, their imposing frames casting long shadows across the wooden planks. The tallest, with arms that could wrestle a bull to the ground, stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to getting her way. But there was something else in her tone, something that made the hair on Boone's neck stand up. The other 2 women flanked her sides, equally tall and muscular, watching him with the intensity of predators sizing up their prey. Boone had traveled 3 days through rough terrain to reach this remote property, his life savings invested in what the seller promised was a fertile land, perfect for cattle ranching. The isolation had been part of the appeal, a chance to start fresh away from the complications of town life. Now standing in the dusty yard with these 3 strangers claiming his space, that isolation felt more like a trap. "Ladies, I think there's been some confusion," Boone said, keeping his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. "This is my property now. I have the legal documents right here." He held up the deed, the official seal still crisp and new. The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for comfort. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, Boone Whitmore. We've been expecting you." The way she said his name sent a chill through him. How did she know who he was? The seller had assured him the transaction was private, that no one else knew about the purchase. "We've been living here for quite some time," the second woman spoke up, her voice deeper than her companions. Taking care of the land, keeping it warm, she emphasized the last word in a way that made Boone's stomach tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. The third woman, a red head with freckles that dotted her powerful shoulders, let out a low laugh. "The previous owner made certain arrangements with us before he left. Arrangements that don't just disappear because of a piece of paper." Boone felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure against his chest. These weren't ordinary squatters or confused neighbors. There was something deliberate about their presence, something calculated that made him question everything about his purchase. The seller had been eager to close the deal quickly, almost suspiciously so. Had he walked into some kind of setup? "What kind of arrangements?" Boone asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The tall woman's eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite amusement. "The kind that involve you staying here with us permanently." She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the blow that would change everything. "You're going to have sex with us, Boone. All 3 of us. That's how this works." The words hit him like a physical blow, not from desire but from the sheer audacity and threat they carried. This wasn't seduction. This was something else entirely. Something that made his hand instinctively move toward the rifle on his horse. But what exactly was he walking into? And why did he have the sinking feeling that his deed might not be worth the paper it was written on? Boone's hand froze halfway to his rifle as the implications of the woman's words sank in. This wasn't some crude proposition from lonely frontier women. The way they stood, the confidence in their voices, the casual mention of arrangements with the previous owner, everything pointed to something far more complex and dangerous than simple intimidation. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Boone said, forcing steel into his voice despite the uncertainty churning in his gut. "But I paid good money for this land, and I'm not going anywhere." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, while maintaining eye contact with the leader. The tall woman chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Game. Oh, Boone, this isn't a game at all. This is business." She gestured toward the farmhouse with a sweep of her muscular arm. "See? The man who sold you this property owed us something, a debt that doesn't disappear just because he ran off with your money." The redhead stepped forward, her boots heavy on the porch steps. "Marcus Vance made promises he couldn't keep, said he'd work the land with us, be our partner in more ways than one. When that didn't work out, he promised us the next owner would honor his commitments." Her green eyes fixed on Boone with unsettling intensity. "That would be you." Boone felt the first real stab of panic. Marcus Vance. That was the seller's name. Though the man had introduced himself as simply Mark, the details seemed too specific to be a lie, too personal. How much did these women actually know about his transaction? Even if that's true, which I doubt, no man can make promises on behalf of someone else, especially not those kinds of promises. The second woman, darker-haired and broader through the shoulders than the others, laughed. You really don't understand how things work out here, do you? When you're this far from civilization, from law, from any kind of help, traditional rules don't apply. We make our own arrangements. The way she emphasized arrangements made Boone's skin crawl. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about money or property disputes. These women had created their own system, their own form of control, and somehow his purchase had walked him directly into their web. The deed is legal, Boone insisted, though his confidence was wavering. Filed with the territorial office, witnessed, sealed. Whatever Marcus Vance promised you personally has nothing to do with me. The leader's smile finally faded, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Legal documents mean nothing out here when you're 3 days from the nearest sheriff and even further from anyone who might care what happens to a stranger. She took a step closer, and Boone was struck by just how imposing she was. Easily 6 feet tall with arms that spoke of years of hard physical labor. Besides, the redhead added, we have our own paperwork, contracts Marcus signed, agreements that specifically mention the transfer of obligations to any future owner. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, and Boone's heart sank as he recognized what looked like official letterhead. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that made Boone's investment seem less like a business transaction and more like an elaborate trap. Had Marcus Vance sold him into some kind of arrangement deliberately? Was this whole property sale a setup to deliver him to these women and whatever scheme they were running? But there was something else in their demeanor, something he couldn't quite identify beneath the intimidation and threats. He sensed something almost like longing, as if this wasn't entirely about control or money. The way the leader's eyes lingered on him, the subtle tension in the redhead's stance. There were layers to this situation he didn't understand yet, and that uncertainty terrified him more than any straightforward threat could have. The document the redhead held looked official enough to make Boone's mouth go dry. Even from several feet away, he could make out what appeared to be signatures and an official seal at the bottom. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had Marcus Vance actually bound him to some kind of contract through the property sale? You're bluffing, Boone said, though his voice lacked conviction. No court would honor a contract that involves forcing someone into whatever this is. The dark-haired woman stepped off the porch, her boots hitting the ground with authority. Who said anything about courts? We handle our own justice out here? She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation, and Boone found himself taking an involuntary step backward. My name is Helena, the leader said, her tone shifting to something almost conversational. This is Ruth. She nodded toward the dark-haired woman and Magdalene. The redhead gave a small wave that somehow managed to be both friendly and threatening. We've been waiting for you for weeks, Boone. Marcus described you perfectly. The casual use of his first name sent another chill through him. How much had Marcus told them? What other details about his life did they know? Whatever Marcus told you about me, he had no right. I bought this property in good faith, and I'm not bound by any agreements he made. Helena's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Boone caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the intimidating exterior. Good faith, Shun, she repeated almost wistfully. That's refreshing. Marcus wasn't much for good faith, especially toward the end. She studied Boone's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You're different from him, quieter, more substantial. Ruth circled around to Boone's left side, moving like a predator, but with an odd gentleness in her eyes. Marcus was all charm and promises at first, swept in here talking about partnership, about building something together. 3 months later, he was already looking for an exit strategy. He used us, Magdalene added, her voice carrying a hurt that surprised Boone. Took advantage of our hospitality, our work, She paused, searching for the right word, our affections, then decided it was too much trouble and ran off with the money from selling the land we improved. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a clearer picture, though it wasn't one that made Boone feel any safer. These women weren't just squatters or con artists. They had been betrayed by Marcus Vance, and now they saw Boone as either their salvation or their revenge. So you see, Helena, continued, moving closer until she was close enough that Boone could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin. We have a legitimate claim here, not just to the land, but to what we were promised, what Marcus committed to, and then abandoned. Boone found himself studying her face, noticing details he had missed in his initial fear. The way her jaw set when she mentioned Marcus, the slight tremor in her hands when she spoke about betrayal. Whatever had happened between these women and his predecessor, it had left scars that ran deeper than property disputes. But there was something else in the way Helena looked at him, something that made his pulse quicken despite the dangerous situation. Was it possible that beneath all the intimidation and threats, there was genuine attraction? And more unsettling still, was he beginning to feel it too? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Boone found himself caught between the rational fear of his situation and an inexplicable pull toward these three women who had upended his carefully planned future. There was something magnetic about Helena's confidence, Ruth's quiet strength, and Magdalene's fierce independence that he couldn't ignore. "Show me this contract," Boone said finally, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. "If Marcus really signs something that binds me, I have a right to see exactly what it says." Magdalene unfolded the document with deliberate care, and Boone stepped closer to examine it. The paper was thick, expensive, with Marcus Vance's signature clearly visible at the bottom, alongside an official notary seal. But as Boone read the terms, his confusion deepened rather than clearing. "This is a partnership agreement," he said, looking up at Helena. "For farming operations, profit sharing," and he paused at a particularly unusual clause, mutual support and companionship for all parties involved. The language was carefully crafted, legally binding, but vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. Marcus was clever with words, Ruth said, moving to stand beside Boone as he read. Her proximity was distracting. She was tall enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his, and he caught the scent of something warm and earthy, like fresh bread in summer rain. He made promises that sounded romantic, but were actually business arrangements, and vice versa. Helena watched Boone's face as he processed the document. "The land has been profitable under our management. We've built irrigation systems, improved the soil, established trade relationships with settlements 2 days' ride from here. Marcus benefited from our work for months before deciding he wanted out. But instead of honoring his commitments," Magdalene added, her green eyes flashing with renewed anger, "he found a buyer and disappeared with the money, leaving us with nothing but a piece of paper that apparently transfers his obligations to whoever bought the property." Boone set the contract down carefully, his mind working through the implications. These women had been more than partners to Marcus. They had been lovers, workers, and business associates rolled into one complex relationship. And according to this document, Marcus had legally bound any future property owner to step into his role. "Even if this contract is legitimate," Boone said slowly, "I didn't sign it. I can't be held responsible for agreements made by someone else, no matter what the paperwork says." Helena's expression shifted, and for a moment, Boone saw past the intimidating facade to something raw and vulnerable. "You're right," she said quietly. "Legally, you're probably not bound by Marcus's promises, but morally, we've invested everything into this land, into this arrangement. We have nowhere else to go." The admission hung in the air between them, changing the entire dynamic of the confrontation. These weren't predators trying to trap him. They were women who had been abandoned and were desperately trying to protect what they had built. Ruth stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "We're not asking you to honor every detail of what Marcus promised, but we are asking you to consider that we might be able to build something better together than any of us could alone." Boone felt his resistance wavering as he looked at each of them in turn. Helena's strength masked a deep loneliness. Ruth's quiet confidence couldn't hide the hope in her eyes. Madeline's fierce independence was built on a foundation of hurt that she was trying desperately to protect. "What exactly are you proposing?" Boone asked. And even as the words left his mouth, he knew he was crossing a line from which there might be no return. The three women exchanged glances, and Boone realized that his answer would determine not just his immediate future, but potentially the rest of his life. Whatever came next, nothing would ever be simple again. Helena stepped forward, her imposing frame somehow less threatening now that Boone understood the pain behind her strength. "We're proposing a real partnership," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Not the half-hearted arrangement Marcus offered, but something genuine. We work the land together, share the profits equally," and she paused, meeting his eyes directly. "We share our lives." The weight of her words settled over them like morning mist. Boone found himself studying each woman with new eyes, seeing past the intimidation to the loneliness that had driven them to this desperate gambit. They weren't trying to trap him. They were trying to save themselves and offer him something he hadn't even realized he was looking for. "The three of you," Boone said slowly, testing the waters. "You've been together since Marcus left." The question carried implications that made his heart race with a mixture of curiosity and unexpected desire. Ruth nodded, a faint blush coloring her strong features. "We found comfort in each other after he abandoned us. It started as survival, but it became something more, something we didn't want to lose." Her honesty was disarming, and Boone felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. Magdalene moved to stand beside her companions, creating a united front that was no longer threatening, but strangely appealing. "We know how it sounds," she said, her green eyes locked on his. "Three women asking a stranger to join them in something most people would never understand. But out here, conventional rules don't apply. We make our own family, our own bonds." Boone's mind raced through the possibilities and consequences. He had come here seeking solitude and a fresh start, but what they were offering was the opposite: connection, partnership, and an intimacy that went far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings, but another part, a part he had long suppressed, whispered that this might be exactly what he needed. "The physical aspect," Boone said, his voice rougher than he intended. "What would that mean exactly?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Helena's smile returned, but this time it was genuine, reaching her eyes for the first time since he had arrived. "It would mean whatever feels natural to all of us," she said simply. "No pressure, no demands, just the freedom to explore what develops between us as we build something together." The honesty in her response surprised him. This wasn't about coercion or fulfilling some obligation to Marcus. This was about four people finding solace and connection in an isolated world where traditional relationships often meant nothing. "And if it doesn't work?" Boone asked, though even as he spoke, he could feel his resistance weakening. There was something about the way Ruth's eyes softened when she looked at him, the way Magdalene's fierce independence seemed to include space for him, the way Helena's strength promised protection rather than domination. "Then we figure it out like adults," Ruth said simply. "But Boone, we've been watching you since you arrived. The way you handle yourself, the respect you showed even when you were frightened. We think it could work. We hope it will." The admission that they had been evaluating him just as much as he had been evaluating them somehow made the proposition feel more balanced, less like a trap, and more like an opportunity. But was he brave enough to take it? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farmyard as Boone weighed the most important decision of his life. Everything about this situation defied convention, challenged every assumption he had made about his future, and yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward these three remarkable women who had turned his world upside down. "I need to see what you've built here," Boone said, finally his practical nature asserting itself, even as his heart raced with possibility. "If we're talking about partnership, I need to understand what I'm partnering with." Helena's relief was visible, though she tried to hide it behind her usual confidence. "Of course, Ruth, show him the irrigation system you designed." The pride in her voice when she spoke of Ruth's accomplishments was unmistakable, and Boone found himself drawn to the genuine affection these women shared for each other. As Ruth led him toward the fields, Boone was amazed by the sophistication of the water management system she had created. Channels carved with precision directed water from a natural spring to carefully planned garden plots and grain fields that showed signs of careful cultivation and impressive yields. "This represents months of work," Ruth explained, her hands gesturing gracefully as she described the engineering challenges she had overcome. Marcus took credit for it when traders came through, but every inch was planned and dug by us. The bitterness in her voice when she mentioned Marcus was matched by the pride she took in her creation. Magdalene, as they walked him through the livestock pens, Boone watched healthy cattle grazing across neatly rotated pastures, while a modest but efficient chicken coop supplied more than enough fresh eggs for trade. We've built steady trade with 3 nearby settlements, Helena explained, discussing margins, seasonal cycles, and supply forecasts with calm confidence. This isn't just surviving, it's prospering. Boone couldn't hide his respect. What the 3 women had created wasn't simply a homestead. It was a strategically run, carefully structured enterprise capable of sustaining all of them. Even more than the profits, it was the unity behind it that struck him. A shared purpose, a shared vision, something he had never truly known. The house, Helena added as they approached the farmhouse, has 4 bedrooms. We use 3, but we always hoped. She let the sentence fade, but the meaning lingered between them. Inside, the home felt warm and lived in. Not extravagant, but solid and thoughtfully kept. The kitchen was built for shared meals. The sitting room invited long conversations. Every corner reflected effort, pride, and intention. It was a home in the truest sense. "We're not expecting an answer today," Ruth said gently once they were seated. "This is important. We want you certain before you decide anything." But Boone already felt the answer forming. Yes, he was drawn to them. Helena's steady touch, Ruth's perceptive smile, Magdalene's fierce fire. But what moved him more deeply was belonging. They weren't offering comfort. They were offering partnership. "What happens now?" he asked. All 3 smiled, knowing that his question carried commitment within it. That evening, they cooked together. The earlier tension had softened into cautious hope. Conversation flowed easily. Crops, trade routes, frontier hardships. The women moved in quiet coordination, their teamwork seamless. Then Helena grew serious. "There's more," she said. "Marcus left us with debts." The room stilled. Madeline retrieved a ledger. Supplies ordered on credit, equipment never paid for. He used our reputation, then disappeared. The figures were heavy, enough to crush them. "How bad?" Boone asked. "Bad enough that if we can't clear it within a month," Ruth answered quietly, "we lose everything." Boone studied the numbers. Significant, but workable. What impressed him most wasn't the debt. It was their honesty. They could have hidden this. "Marcus damaged you," he said firmly, "but this can be fixed." He looked up. "I have capital from selling my previous holdings, enough to settle this and grow what you've built." Relief washed over them. Helena's composure broke into tears. Ruth squeezed his hand. Magdalene's guarded expression softened. "But," Boone added, voice steady, "we do this properly. Legal agreements, clear responsibilities, equal say." He met each of their eyes. "And we let the personal side develop naturally. No pressure, no forced expectations." Helena smiled through tears. "That's all we wanted. A true partner, an equal." That night they planned not just survival, but a future. 3 months later, Boone stood again in that same yard. The farm had grown beyond what any of them imagined. More livestock, stronger irrigation, expanded trade across 3 territories. The debts were cleared, profits steady. But the real success was them. Helena became his closest strategic partner, their connection deepening into something built on respect and affection. Ruth's creativity and calm insight made her indispensable. Their quiet work hours turning into a bond that felt effortless. Madeline had guarded her heart longest, but one spontaneous kiss while repairing fencing changed everything. What once seemed impossible had evolved into something balanced and real. They created their own structure, their own definition of family, their own way of loving. Yes, there were challenges, moments of jealousy, shared decisions, the awareness that society might never understand them. But what they had was stronger than outside opinion. The legal partnership secured their future. The farm flourished. New rooms were added, including a proper office for managing trade. And Boone no longer felt the loneliness that once pushed him toward isolation. One evening, the four of them sat on the expanded porch overlooking thriving fields. "Any regrets?" Helena asked softly. Boone studied the three women who had transformed his life. "Only one," he said. "I regret it took Marcus Vance's betrayal to bring us together. We could have started this sooner." Their laughter carried into the dusk, full, free, certain. In a world that demanded conformity, they chose connection. In a society bound by tradition, they built their own meaning of partnership, and in doing so, they found something lasting. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and watch the next unforgettable tale on your screen. And don't forget, here on Kindness Matters, we believe the strongest foundations are built on respect, courage, and heart.